Hello and welcome to the third video about GDP, Gross Domestic Product. Now, this will be a relatively shorter video to discuss just one important mathematical concept that will be on your quizzes, and that is basically the one really sort of a little bit more math heavy, more math involved part of our discussion of GDP. And that is the difference between real and nominal GDP. Now, the distinction between real and nominal doesn't just happen with GDP. It happens with lots of different economic variables. In fact, you can draw a distinction between real and nominal almost every time there's something in economics that changes over time. And every time we draw this distinction, we have in mind the same concept. And that concept is the fact that inflation exists. Inflation happens. Prices get higher over time. We're going to be discussing inflation later on in a different week. But for now, all you need to know is that, in general, over time, over long periods of time, the level of prices in the economy of the United States and most others just rises over time. The same thing gets more and more expensive over time, or more expensive in nominal terms. The same thing has a higher and higher price over time. So the same apple, for example, the same kind of apple, costs more today in terms of like dollars and cents than it did 20 years ago. And the same holds true for other items, ordinary everyday household items, clothes, and so on. Everything gets higher prices over time. So, remember, GDP, the way that we get GDP is by adding up all of the market prices of all the things that are produced inside the country in a given year, or of all the final goods and services that are produced inside the country in a given year. But if prices overall go up over time, then if we add up all the prices for this year, and we add up all the prices for 5 years from now, then even if we actually produce the exact same thing 5 years from now that we produce today, even if everything's exactly the same, that number, the sum of all the prices for 5 years in the future, is going to be higher. It's going to look higher just because of inflation, just because prices have gone up. So when you look at GDP over time and you see that it's rising, you have to be able to separate how much it rose because of inflation, because prices just got higher, and how much it rose because we produced more stuff, right? What we're interested in is the real aspect of that. What we're interested in is to see whether or not over time we produce more stuff. But if we just look at GDP, if we just look at the sum of all prices the sum of all prices in the economy, and we look at that over time, then when it goes up, when it grows, we're not sure at first whether it went up just because of inflation or because we actually produce more stuff. So the sum of all prices, of all prices of final goods and services in the economy in a given year, taken at face value, taken as they are, that is called nominal GDP. That's what nominal means in this context. We just take the prices as they are at face value, we add them up, that's GDP. The problem is, like I said, when you look at nominal GDP over time and you see that it grows, part of that growth is real. In other words, it's caused by producing more stuff, by growing the economy, and part of that growth is just an illusion created by inflation because prices got higher, so when you add them up you get a higher number. So nominal GDP is misleading and is not generally used for much for that reason. That's why we prefer to work with real GDP. And real GDP, the purpose, the idea behind real GDP is that we take the numbers, we take the nominal numbers, and we wipe away the effects of inflation from that. The idea behind real GDP is that we only look at, when real GDP grows, it only grows because of an actual increase in the goods and services, in the amount of goods and services that were bought and sold in the economy, not because of inflation, not because we are making the same things but they're more expensive now. No, when real GDP goes up or down, it goes up or down because of a real change in how much we produce, or rather in how much we buy and sell, and how much the economy has made for the market. So what happens in practical terms is that we will measure nominal GDP first for the economy, and then we will apply a formula to wipe away the effects of inflation so that we are left with real GDP. And that's what you need to know, that formula that helps us get real GDP after we start with just the nominal measurement, the nominal value. Okay, and that formula is this. This is the formula. Real GDP is equal to nominal GDP divided by this thing down here, which is itself the price index divided by 100. Now, that the fact that we divide by 100 is just an artifact of how we measure the price index to make the math work. But the idea is that we start with nominal GDP, right, which we have calculated by adding up all of the prices. Okay, and then we have something called the price index, which is a measure of inflation. We will discuss more about that when we get to inflation. But all you need to know right now is that this thing called the price index is a measure of inflation. So we take the nominal GDP and we divide it by price index divided by 100, also known as the GDP deflator. We deflate the nominal GDP with it, because the nominal GDP is inflated. It's higher than it should be because of inflation. So we deflate it by applying this formula, and then we get real GDP, which is, like I said, it's the GDP after we scrub away the effects of inflation from it. So when we look at real GDP, we know that changes in real GDP are caused by actually producing and buying and selling more stuff, and not just by prices going up while we make the same things as before. So that's the formula. That is all you really need to know when working with real nominal GDP, with real and nominal GDP. There are three things in this formula: nominal GDP, the price index, and real GDP. When you know two of them, you can apply the formula or a permutation of it to find out the third one. That's pretty much it. You know two of these things, you find out the third one using this formula. Let me give you some examples in the form of a table. Here we go. There is a table. Now, as I said, between these three things, nominal GDP, price index, and real GDP, if you know two of them, you can calculate the third. So here I have examples. Each row is a separate example, where in each example we know two of these things, and we can apply this formula right here to calculate the third one. So let's go through them. First example is very straightforward. We know nominal GDP, and we know the price index. And the question is, what is real GDP? So let's see. Real GDP is equal to the nominal GDP divided by the price index divided by 100. So we're looking at nominal GDP, 6,000, divided by 120 divided by 100. In other words, we're looking at 6,000 divided by 1.2, which is 5,000. So there you go. For the first row, real GDP is 5,000. By the way, if you're wondering 5,000 what's the unit here? Let's say billions of dollars. Let's say that is the unit for GDP, for nominal and real GDP. They're both measured in billions of dollars. The price index is just an index. It doesn't have a unit. It's an index. Okay, now let's go on to row number 2. Here we're going to have to play with the formula a bit, right? Because we don't know the nominal GDP. We know that a real GDP, 8,000, is equal to something over 150 divided by 100, so over 1.5. Which means, of course, that the something, nominal GDP, x, is equal to 8,000 multiplied by 1.5, which is equal to 12,000. So there you go. That is nominal GDP in this case, 12,000. And that is row number 2. Now, let's go on to row number 3. And here we know the real GDP and the nominal, but we don't know the price index. So let's find out. Real GDP is 10,000. Now this is equal to nominal GDP, in this case 13,000, divided by, well, x over 100. So what is x? Well, switching this around, x over 100 is equal to 13,000 divided by 10,000. So in other words, x over 100 is equal to 1.3. Which means that x is equal to 1.3 times 100. In other words, x is equal to 130. And there we go. The price index in this case is 130. That is the answer. And that's it. These three examples cover all of the situations that you might face when dealing with nominal GDP, real GDP, and the price index. You always apply this formula when you know two of them, and you can find the third one. And that's it for the math. I apologize for this video being a little bit blurry. There was a problem with the camera that I couldn't fix. But the important thing is that you can see the numbers, not me. So with that, have a good week, and I will see you next time.